Who knows what Jay-Z, J.K. Rowling, Bill Gates and Oprah Winfrey all have in common? Okay, I will tell you then. They have all overcome failure in one shape or form to go on to gain success in their respective careers. Welcome to My Perfect Failure. Join us as we delve into the world of our perfect failures. We will interview, explore, and discuss how our perfect failures can lead us to success. Join us and tune in.
Welcome everybody to another episode of My Perfect Failure. Today, as always, I'm super excited because I have another amazing guest for you. So my guest today writes stories that let readers feel while making them think. Her novels include Potrero Complex. I might need a repronunciation of that, but I think it's Potrero Complex, the award-winning The Nighthawkers, Dreaming of Song Times, and Fran, the second time around. She's an award-winning journalist, speechwriter, playwright, and certified notification book coach. She also teaches workshops on various aspects of the craft of writing. Her notification book, Wrangling the Doubt Monster, Fighting Fears, Finding Inspiration, will be published in October 2024. So a very, very, very warm welcome to My Perfect Failure, Amy L Bernstein. How are you?
I'm fine, Paul. Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you for having me on today to your brilliantly titled podcast, My Perfect Failure.
Yes, I've had a few of them in my time.
Haven't we all?
There's probably some that are kind of like brewing in the background and they're about to pounce on me. But I know that there's opportunities in those situations. So that's the beauty of My Perfect Failure. So there's always opportunities. So I'm really excited to meet you. When we connected, I was like, well, yes, I really want to have this discussion, because I kind of alluded to you before we hit the record button that I definitely have people in family and friends very close to that have a relationship with wanting to put out a novel, wanting to create their first novel. And I know the angst and the challenges that can be there. And these people are very talented. So you can have talented people. My background isn't in this space, but I feel the angst and the struggle when I connect with them. So I was super excited to connect with you today and just explore, have a conversation, get an understanding about why is it so difficult, and to maybe tease out some ideas and tools that maybe they can employ to help them with their journey. And just for everybody listening, the title of this particular episode is Artistic Resilience, Navigating Doubt on Your Creative Journey. So Amy, I'm ready to explore. But what I was keen maybe to ask you initially, your background, was writing always there for you? Was it always something that you wanted to maybe get into?
Yes, but my path was not terribly straight, I suppose. And I guess if I look at it from a different angle, it was as straight as it could be, because it depends on what we also mean by writing. The joke that I always make is I really was only ever good at one thing. I'm terrible at math. I have a terrible sense of direction. I'm really pretty good at putting words on paper. And so, I had a career in journalism and in a lot of pretty intense communications in large, complicated organizations, as well as some small, complicated organizations. And so I've always been writing, but stepping into, the fictional side of writing, because I came out of the nonfiction side, well, it's really a very different kind of experience.
Okay, so really, really interesting. So your path you mentioned wasn't maybe conventional, if there is a conventional path, but something kept you going and kept you, I guess, the path remained. What was that? Can you isolate what that was?
Well, let me give you a couple quick stories that might get at some of what you're raising here. First of all, as I mentioned, I felt like writing was the one thing I knew how to do well. So, in terms of trying to put food on the table for myself for many years, I turned to jobs that allowed me to do that in magazine journalism, in radio journalism, in print journalism, and then in communications and executive speech writing. And so those were paths that I was able to follow, and my work, could be recognized. And, it's a little bit more straightforward when you're inside that sort of government or corporate or nonprofit world where the rules are pretty clear. But the minute you step outside those lanes and you want to get into fiction, whether that's playwriting or novels or short story or creative nonfiction or even something like memoir, well, the rules are really very different and become kind of very hard to chase after because um, it's the world of creative writing is so extraordinarily subjective that, it's very easy to doubt yourself very quickly when you go into those fields. And so everything kind of changes for you as a writer when you start batting for the other side, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah. And that difference, that subtle difference, or maybe big difference that you found, was that something that you just have that you found out just by the crossover and sort of exploring? How did you encounter that?
Yes. Well, I had a compelling need just deep inside me that I had to do other kinds of writing. I had to write creatively, that I couldn't just spend the rest of my adult life sort of writing for other people's purposes. And certainly not just writing to suit an organization's needs. I needed to write to suit my own needs.
Okay.
So I really had a strong compulsion to do that. And, I will tell you that way back in my 20s, and I assure you that was a long time ago, I remember starting and trying to start a novel in my 20s and taking lunch hours from my job to go sit on the grass somewhere and try and write.
Mm.
And, I abandoned that effort. And, it takes such vast amount of deep inner belief and faith and self-confidence to sort of carry through a project like that, because the world outside isn't telling you to do it. It's all
Yeah,
coming from inside, and that's difficult.
yeah. And also, I think sometimes what can happen, because when we're on a journey and we require self-belief, I guess discipline, resilience, which is part of this title, and we're going on that journey, sometimes even our family and friends might be slightly hesitant about what we're doing because they don't have the same fire that we have. So that can maybe challenge the doubts that already exist within us. Is that something that you came across?
I think you're highlighting something that is so true for so many writers. Writing is a really lonely experience. And when you are connected to people who don't think that way, they don't think like a writer, they don't think about
Yeah,
story the way you might think as a writer. What's going on in their heads is so different from what's going on in yours when it comes to that kind of thing. It's very hard for people around you to understand your process, what's going on. There's a classic story about how writers hate going home for the holidays, like to family, and the kind of the running joke is because everyone's going to ask them, so what are you
yeah.
working on? So when's your book coming out? Why isn't your book out? What are you going to write next? Gee, why haven't you sold anything?
Yeah,
And so you get bombarded by these incredibly painful, difficult, existential questions to which, that put you on the defensive when in fact you have done nothing wrong or out of line, or it hasn't been lack of effort, it has nothing to do with your ability. And yet our cultures, you know both in your culture and in the UK and certainly here in America, it can just make you feel like somehow you're on the wrong side of everything, as a writer. It's very difficult that way.
yeah. As you're talking, I'm just, it's triggered a thought that I had. I was talking to a friend recently, and he was like, I hadn't spoken to him for a while. So he was like, what's happened to your podcast? And I was like, nothing, it's still going and stuff. And so what he was referencing, he was thinking that I should be like Tim Ferriss by now. I should be come on, it's a process. It takes time. I'm having fun. I'm meeting amazing people. I'm having these amazing conversations. We're putting out all this wonderful insights and positivity out into the ether. It kind of takes time, and you kind of, everybody's got their own journey and their own goals for whatever
Exactly.
success
And
looks
this
like for
leads
them.
to you're so right. And this leads to one of my theories about all of this is that certainly in our cultures today, we put a premium on success that we can see and that we can measure, and
Yeah,
we can be pretty superficial about that. I mean, you could look at an influencer on TikTok with 2 million views and say, well, that person is successful, and that's a very superficial metric of success. But we have a lot of these superficial metrics of success, and we look for them.
yeah,
This person is making a high figure salary. Well, that person is
yeah,
incredibly successful. Again, that's a really superficial measure, really. And so when it comes to, I always say artists and just what I call creatives at large, and creativity comes in so many forms. It's not so easy to measure success, and we need to define that for ourselves. And for some of us, success may just be that you sat down and wrote a page today.
yeah,
Success may be that you looked at your clay and you thought about a shape that you want to make, and you can't wait to start, and so we need to separate ourselves as creative people from these conventional and superficial measures of success that our families impose on us as
yeah,
well, because that may not be working for us, and we shouldn't feel beholden to that.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And it can be incredibly tricky because when we're talking about staying the course and controlling self-doubt, because self-doubt, we all have that. I have that, certainly. Do you think, I don't know what your method has been, but do you potentially make sure that you surround yourself by the right type of people that really, they can be critical, they can provide critique, but ultimately they're kind of in the same space, and there's a supportive element there, because we can have loved ones, they can be family, they can be friends, but if they're in a totally different field to us, and it really doesn't understand the process, the journey, the self-doubt that is very real, is important to you to maybe understand the types of individuals you have conversations about your career about.
Yes, Paul, I think you're absolutely right. Creative people need to surround themselves with creative communities, because you need to be surrounded by people who are going to have understand the difficulty of your own journey as a creative person, and you're going to get encouragement and support, and they're not looking for external success measures. They're looking for you to feel validated on your own creative process, that path. And I will say that I'm not sure I even knew that I was doing it, but in the past couple of years, I have built phenomenally supportive creative communities. I'm a book coach, and so I help other writers on their journey. So I'm very connected to a lot of other book coaches who are doing this work, but I'm also connected to a lot of writers and other people in the arts, because we intuitively understand a lot of what we're going through, and we don't ask those awkward and difficult questions of one another. Um,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
why haven't you finished this yet, or why
mm,
isn't this done, or why,
yeah,
these things, because we intuitively understand kind of the what we're going through. And that is really, really important, because this is different. Making something from nothing is very, very hard. And we're so full of doubt about it anyway, that surrounding ourselves with a really affirmational community is very important to keeping on with your own work.
yeah. I mentioned Tim Ferriss earlier, and I listened to an interview he did probably about a year. Actually, the interview is probably quite old, but I probably listened to it about a year ago. And he was interviewing Jerry Seinfeld, and Jerry Seinfeld was
Mhm,
talking about his journey to writing. And he says
mhm,
that he's always thinking creatively, and he's always thinking about writing something. His will be sketches for his shows and his stand-up and stuff. And he was saying that he can spend all day writing something and he might mention it to the wrong person, and they totally will maybe dismiss it or not be very flattering about what he's done. He said that they can say just one word and it can totally decimate your entire day. So I think he's learned over the years that when he's in that creative process, he would just get on with it, and he doesn't need to be telling everybody about what he's been doing for the best part of that day.
Well, that's true. I mean, I don't let my husband read almost none of my drafts and much of my work. I mean, I don't, we do need to shield ourselves from outside eyes and critiques before we're truly ready. And and early on, we really aren't ready. This reminds me too of, many writers groups are so well intentioned where writers get together to sort of share and critique each other's work. But too often, those groups devolve into hurtful situations where writers who are very vulnerable just start finding everybody else's weaknesses and poking at them. And it's before long, you realize that your writers group feels toxic to you, and you may not, these are my friends and we've been doing this for years. And why do I feel so awful? And it's because it hasn't become a place of support and encouragement anymore. It's become a place of tearing down. And you have to get out of that group, get out of it right away, leave. And so it really is so important to surround ourselves with, for lack of a better word, creative positivity and not negativity, because the world is out there. There's plenty of negative stuff out there, and I have to laugh. I can't imagine saying to Jerry Seinfeld, Jerry, that bit just doesn't seem funny. I really think you should kill that.
Yeah. But I guess it happens. He's got friends and don't have that emotional intelligence, and they would just blurt out whatever comes to mind. So I think there's a time and a place for gentle critique. So with writing, do you, which I'm not, or an author, do we have to get to a point where we actually identify ourselves as an author? So when it's not something which, regardless of what stage we're at, that we actually just identify, I'm an author, this is what I'm being brought here to do, whether we're still working as doing another job, but we have to kind of really think of ourselves as an author.
That's a wonderful question, and I have an answer to that. But before I give you my answer, I just have to ask you, Paul, did you call yourself a podcaster like the minute you did your first podcast?
No, totally not. You know what? It's a good question, actually. It's a good riposte, because I think I've been doing this so it's been podcasting, the idea of putting a podcast together, we're 2023 now, aren't we? So the idea of putting something together was probably 2 years in the making before I first published in 2019. So I'm probably just at that point now where I consider myself a podcaster. So prior to that, it's been a journey, and I still feel that I'm at the start of my journey-ish, but I like that. I like the fact that there's room to grow, there's room to explore, there's room to develop and become better and better and better. But so to answer your question, no, it took me a while.
I'm so glad I asked you, because I think there's so much truth in that. We don't step into owning our creative selves immediately. Some people do. Some people do and probably shouldn't. But I will tell you that for me, even though all my jobs professionally were involved writing from my early 20s on, and even though my major in college involved writing, I never ever called myself a writer. That seemed like something I just had not earned that. I was well past the age of 50 before I could even start having that come out of my mouth seriously. So different people handle this differently. There are plenty of people who are coming straight out of college and saying, "Well, I'm a writer. That's what I am," and that's great. They're owning it. I felt very conflicted about it. And now I say it, and now I can say it with a straight face, but it took me a really good chunk of my life.
Yeah. And I think, and I'm not sure there's a right or wrong answer for it, because I think there is maybe an idea this is quite random, but Muhammad Ali, when he was boxing,
Mm-hmm.
he called himself the greatest before he'd won a world championship, and I think he did that to help himself with confidence and to detach himself from doubt. And I think it was almost him pushing himself. And I think some people might need that kind of almost not fake confidence, but that push to kind of give themselves confidence. I think I was very similar to you, where I needed to do the work to own the idea that
Yes.
there's some background work there, and I've gone through a journey. Now I can identify with being a podcaster. But certainly at the beginning, the idea of me claiming, getting a badge saying I'm a podcaster, or getting a t-shirt saying I'm a podcaster, that definitely wasn't part of my journey. So researching you, what I found really interesting, amongst numerous things, is that you don't settle for just one genre. You've got multiple areas of focus. How did that come about?
Right. So I am indeed a multi-genre author, having published in mystery thriller, romance, fantasy, my forthcoming nonfiction book, and something for young teens, young adult. Yes. For me, it's I find the story I really feel compelled to tell, and then I decide how that story needs to be told, and that in turn involves figuring out who is the reader for the story, which kind of drives a lot of other things. And if you're going to write in a very well-known genre like romance, you have to acknowledge what the rules are. Romance has a lot of rules to it. So you have to be clear about what those rules are. Same if you're going to write a mystery, the Potrero Complex is a mystery. You have to honor the rules of mystery, which is, there's something bad is happening. Someone has to have a compelling reason to try and solve the situation, solve the mystery, and the reader should be kept wondering, till the end. So there are rules that you have to follow, and then so I'll follow those rules to a point, and then I try and break some of the rules. Let's see if I can get away with it. So yes, I don't write in just one genre.
So that's fascinating. So your journey to understanding that there are various genres, and you will explore anything that feels right at the time. And when you talk about rules, have you learned them by going to classes and learning those, or reading books, or have you developed those rules from the process, trial and error, the work that you've done?
No, well, when you're writing in fiction, when you're writing in a known genre, you really need to have done reading in that genre and reading about the genre, and you really have to do the research to understand the world that you want to write in. Or you won't earn the reader's trust, because what you have to remember is when a writer picks up a book that's billed as a romance, they have expectations because they read romance. They know the rules of the genre better than you do, perhaps. And so you need to meet that reader's expectations, or they'll basically throw the book across the room, so to speak. And I do recall, I've gotten many very good reviews for my romance, The Nighthawkers, but I do recall someone saying, well, I don't know if this was really a romance because it wasn't, the happily ever after wasn't that clear. And is it really romance? And I'm thinking, okay, fair. I pushed some rules in that book a little bit because I wanted to make it interesting and inventive for me as a writer. And I could see why someone would feel maybe right on the fence of not sticking to the rules. But at the end of the day, a writer is going to write the stories that she really wants to tell, the story she wants to tell. And so, that's how you have to go about it.
And
It's a balancing act.
And is that kind of like the process? Because you talk about getting your readers to feel and think. And even if somebody doesn't quite get it, doesn't quite understand it, you're getting them to think, you're getting them to maybe compare what typically they view as what a typical romance book should be. Because I can buy a music album. So if I buy, if an artist that I like produces a piece of music, he might have produced that maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and I like that. Okay, well, he's got a new album coming. I'm gonna get that. When I listen to that the new album, it might be different to what he's done before, or what they've done before, and I'm like, I don't quite understand this. But when I read it listen to it a little bit more, suddenly it comes to life. I kind of get it. And is that kind of the process as a reader as well? You don't have to enjoy it immediately. Sometimes the reader, because as an author, you're a step ahead because you're going through the journey. You're putting this material down and you're putting it out into the ether. And as a reader, we need to work. We've kind of get our own interpretation on the piece, but also we've got to give ourselves time to kind of let it ferment and let it digest.
Well, it's funny because I was thinking about, as you were giving the music analogy, I was thinking a lot about that. I was thinking there's a real good analogy there. Like, for example, I love jazz. And so if someone's put out jazz music that I love, and then they have a new album come out and I go to listen to that album and it's like sappy pop ballads, I'm like, wait, what? What did you do to me? So you better know what you're getting going into it, right? If they're going to switch it up like that. I mean, the reason that my author motto is that I write stories that let readers feel by making them think is because I do infuse every book, even a romance, which people don't always expect. I infuse every book with questions that I raise questions about power, about the powerful and the powerless, about social justice, about right and wrong. I raise all these questions in different ways in my books, in the context, of course, of fiction and storytelling. I don't think I think I'm fair to say that I'm not particularly heavy-handed about it, but I'm always asking those questions in the context of the story. So that's where that sort of comes from. But then you have to, you're doing that inside the genre that you're writing in. So it's all got to fit together. So it's definitely not easy.
Yeah. I can imagine. And so you mentioned earlier, you spoke about the idea that, you're aware of rules, but when needed, you will break the rules. So can you maybe expand on that? And because I guess for some authors, can it be potentially they're following the doctrine, they're following the rules, and maybe it can become, maybe they feel that they have to. Maybe there's if we're being too out there, do we have challenges with agents and so forth to get the book published and so forth? That stuff I have totally no idea about. So maybe you can expand on that rule stuff that you mentioned.
Well, there's many different ways of answering that question. It's a very deep question because from the perspective of the publishing business, the business side, there are so many rules right now. Rules about, what the publishing world is looking for, what they're willing to take a risk on. The cost of publishing has gone up dramatically. The cost of paper itself has risen tremendously, and the cost of labor simply associated with all the jobs in publishing has risen because wages have gone up because of inflation. And so when you put all these things together, both rising labor costs and rising material costs like paper in the publishing industry, that's going to affect and start driving decisions about the risks that publishers will take and what they will publish, because they're in business to recoup their costs and make a profit. So we're talking about rules. There's many different ways of looking at the rules. And then, and I can't control, that's absolutely out of my control as an author. I mean, I can self-publish, in which case I can ignore all the publishers and just put something out there myself. And I've done both. I mean, I've been published by publishers and I've been published, by myself. And there's pros and cons to both that we don't even have time to get into all that. But that's a different show. We could do that. But in terms of rules, I mean, I'll give you an example just from the story side. For example, with the mystery thriller that I wrote, the Potrero Complex, you're going to pick it up and it's going to seem like there's aspects of it that are classic mystery. The very first line of the book lets you know that a teenager is missing. So right away, you're going to go down that road. However, without spoiling anything, I will say that by the end, the mystery is partially solved, but not entirely solved, because I don't like to tie everything up with a neat red bow because life's not like that. And I don't think every story has to be like that. So I
Yeah.
leave you with questions and maybe even more questions than answers. I like that. Some readers like that and some readers hate that. So, that's what I mean about sort of bending rules, as opposed to following all the rules. Because I mean, like in a classic Agatha Christie, it's all going to be tied up neat as a bow, right? Or neat as a pin at the
Yeah.
end, right? Um, so that's what I
Yeah,
mean by
and
that.
that's more formulaic in terms of how it's positioned for TV, and it has to have a,
Right.
got your audience
Right.
expecting. If it doesn't, like, it's about, I guess, money at the end of the day. So what I'm intrigued to ask you is, when you're in that creative process and you're putting one of your books together and you're just immersed, what does that feel like?
It's different for every author, but I will say that some of the most magical moments are once you're really deep inside the story of the novel, and once you are far enough along that you really, really understand where you're going in the story, you know how it's going to
Mm,
end, you know what has to happen, and you can get deep into these scenes where you just are absolutely in that world. You're just, they call it being in the flow.
yeah.
It's a wonderful experience. It has happened to me with every book that I've written, but it only happens in kind of in spurts.
Mm,
And when it does happen, you got a handle on it. You've pieced this thing together and you really understand how all the pieces are coming together in the story. It's a wonderful feeling. But then there are many, 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 many days and weeks where that's not where you are, where you're trying to figure it out.
yeah.
So it's wonderful when it happens.
Yeah. I'm keeping coming up with analogies, but I'm thinking of another one. I'm thinking of a marathon runner that does 26 miles. They probably have maybe a couple of miles here and there where they're in the flow, but then there's some challenging miles where it's a little bit be resilient. They've got to dig in, and I imagine there's some similarities with authorship and but when you're creating a novel.
Yeah, I think that's a good analogy. I've never run a marathon. I never will. But I
I'm
think, I
snap.
think you're right. I think you're right. I think you're right. Because writing a novel is a marathon. Well, it is a marathon, as we say, marathon, not a sprint. It is a marathon of its own kind. Yes, for sure.
Okay. So today you support a community of novelists or authors that are on their journey, need support, and you're giving them the guidance that they need to put out there and create their novels. So what are some of the, I guess, most common challenges, if there are, that you find with people that are starting their journey of authorship?
There are many, but one of them, probably the most fundamental mistake that a less experienced writer will make, is not figuring out the why of a book. Why am I writing this story and
Okay.
who am I telling it to? So it starts with knowing your why, the why of the story, the protagonist. But that leads in very quickly to how to structure a book.
Okay.
And many, many writers get their joy from just sitting down with a blank page and sort of going, just go, right, 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 right. That's fine. If that's a process that works for many people, at least initially. But the step you cannot skip is structure. Because at the end of the day, you need to understand what the journey of change is in the book. What's the journey the reader is going to go on? How is that paced? How does one scene lead inevitably to another scene? So what are the mountains of the book? You can diagram books where there are hills that you climb to, an act one high point, and then you sort of come down a bit, and then you have an act two high point, and then you have to have a denouement that takes you to a conclusion.
Mhm.
And you really need to understand the structure of your book before you can really, really consider it written or written well. And ignoring structure is a key mistake that many writers make early on. They think if they just have put words on the page, they've written. And what they've done is they have put words on the page.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I guess you won't see the flow from a
Hmm.
reader's perspective,
Hmm.
and maybe even from their perspective. You can never be. I don't know this. I'm speculating slightly, but when you produce a book and it's got that coherent chemistry because you've implemented a structure. It probably feels better when you read it. And maybe if you haven't implemented that, maybe because you don't know how, you're pleased maybe that you've put the book, you created a book. But it's like when you buy something and you get it home and it doesn't feel quite right. Maybe there's that little nag there that it never feels 100%.
Yeah, I mean, imagine that you made some product where you had to sell all the parts separately, but in a package, right? So they come, in under too much plastic, right? And it's like 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 different parts, right? Or even a piece of IKEA furniture, right? So you get it in pieces. And the thinking is that, well, this is all going to go together into a
Yeah.
seamless thing, into the thing that I want. And then I'm going to be able to use the thing. So when you're writing a book, you may have manufactured all these parts, and the parts may be beautiful in and of themselves, beautifully milled, they shine, they're wonderful. But at the end of the day, they don't fit together and you don't have a thing.
Yeah.
Um, and so it's very much like that. So, I mean, really structure and finding the why of the story and understanding how scenes knit together and build upon one another, such essential work to writing, especially fiction. It's true for creative nonfiction as well. Um, and it's a step that authors don't quite grapple with enough sometimes.
So when you're putting the structure together, so you've got the why and you're putting the structure together, does that all need to be there before you start the actual writing, or can that formulate as you go along?
Yeah, there are certainly different ways of doing this, and I would never every writer's process is every writer's process, and what works for one writer doesn't work for another. So you can't speak in absolutes about this, but I will say that I think some of the best outcomes can be achieved, and I'm speaking as a book coach, from helping the author to grapple with the actual storytelling, words on the page, along with structure and really outlining a story properly so that you understand the purpose of a given scene, and how that scene leads to the next scene. Because the more you understand where the book is going and how it's flowing piece by piece, the stronger those pieces themselves can be because they've got a purpose and a point. And you're not writing into a black hole. You're
Yeah.
writing to a place.
Yeah. And it must be. So what does it feel like for you as a business coach when you start working with one of your clients, your authors, and you see that evolution? You see them come from someone that needs support, which is great. They recognize that they need support, but then you see them evolving and becoming more confident, they've got that greater clarity, they understand the why, they've got the structure in place, and you just see their writing develop. What's that like for you?
This is so as a book coach, this is what book coaches tell one another. This is why we do the work. It is absolutely magical. When you've had a lot of conversations with a client, as I have, and you've gone on a process that journey could be weeks, or in my case, sometimes it's months. And then you see them have a breakthrough where suddenly things are really starting to fit together in a beautiful way. The chapters are flowing, or even an outline that had made no sense. Suddenly the outline seems incredibly strong and is pointing to a really exciting book. When that happens, and I've seen this transformation in a couple of clients now, it is just amazingly powerful, gratifying, and it renews your belief as a book coach in the power of structure and strong intentionality in putting a piece of writing together. Because these authors don't reach this point, they don't cross that threshold until they really begin to understand the purpose, the point of what they are writing, which may sound so ridiculously obvious. Of course, an author knows the point of their book, but no, many authors don't know the point of their book. And that's part of what you have to really excavate with them. And once they really understand it and can see it clearly, the writing becomes a lot more powerful.
Yeah, that makes sense. So when you understand why you've put this, because sometimes you can just do something without any direction, and we all can do that in many facets of our lives. But when we have that clarity, then it just becomes, I guess, more logical and more organic. And I think you used that term flow earlier. Then we can
Yes.
develop and find that flow more easily. So, in relation, this episode is about, or this discussion, but we're definitely talking about resilience and doubt, and about continuing that that creative process. So in your experience, are there certain tips or tricks that authors out there, whether you're a beginner author or even if you're maybe more experienced, I guess we all still have resilience, have self-doubt, are there things that we can do to mitigate some of the challenges that we will encounter?
Well, one of my theories about doubt, about self-doubt, is that you cannot banish doubt, but you can accommodate it and manage it and do your best work despite feelings of doubt. Because feelings of doubt don't ever entirely go away. It's intrinsic to just being human. And if you think
Yeah.
you've banished all doubt, I think you're lying to yourself on some level. That doesn't mean you can't feel confident, but doubt is always with us. But what you have to do is be able to recognize that feeling doubtful is not the thing that needs to hold you back. You can allow it to hold you back, but you can also just recognize it and not let it hold you back and go forward. And, I'm sort of summarizing here, sort of a deep and complex experience that you may have to go through stages to wrestle with that. But at the end of the day, that's sort of one of my takeaways, which is we accommodate doubt, we live with it, we go on to do
Yeah.
our best work. We don't automatically let that feeling of I can't do this or I'm not good enough. You don't let that actually stop you. You see it for what it is and you go forward and you let that live inside you, but not hold you back.
Okay, I love that. So that sounds like there's a bit of mindset work going on there where you kind of almost
Yes.
reframe it and you don't let it. It's almost like a boxing match. Self-doubt is
Yes.
not going to win this match. I know what you're doing. I know what you're trying to do, but actually with me, you've got no chance. It's almost, I don't know, trying to
Yeah.
reframe.
Reframe. Yes, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's a quote from Carl Jung that I absolutely love. That's I quoted in my book that's coming out next year, Wrangling the Doubt Monster. And Carl Jung said, the famous psychologist and kind of
Yeah, yeah.
frenemy of Sigmund Freud. Um, he said, nothing is more poisonous to the nervous system than a disregarded or checked creative impulse.
Yeah.
And I think that's wonderful. And we can't let our self-doubts as creatives in a world that's looking for very definable success measures, we cannot let this stop us from making art however we define that.
Okay, I love that. Love that. I need to look up that quote. Definitely. And I want to talk about your book, but I just want to ask one more question before we do that. Um, so we often hear, and I think we've kind of explored it a little bit, maybe with our last point that we covered. But writer's block is a term that's thrown about a lot. And I heard one of my favorite authors is Stephen Pressfield. He talks about a little bit around that, around the idea. I think, to be fair, you've kind of answered it as well. But writer's block almost. I think he uses the analogy of an electrician. If you hire an electrician, they might not want to do it, but they will come around and do the job. And he thinks with authors that not me, I'm not an author, but authors, sometimes we might feel resistance about putting pen to paper, but we still can. And you don't have to write, 100 pages. You might write 2 pages. So he says that authors, when you get to that point, that writer's block potentially doesn't exist. Do you have any thoughts around that?
Yes, and he probably does that in the War of Art or some of his other
Yeah.
publications. Yes, I think that it's a rather unfortunate phrase that was coined because it sounds like something so definite, like a brick wall. And there are many ways of doing your work as a writer without actually engaging in the actual act of writing. Because I think that thinking is one of the most important things a writer can do.
Mm.
Literally sitting in a quiet place or a quiet, beautiful place or on your couch, it doesn't matter. And thinking about story or thinking about a character or thinking about what moves you right now or thinking about what's really bothering you right now, thinking about things you might want to express in ways that a writer does, that is still really important to the writing process. And so even if you're not in the act of writing, if you're thinking about different things that are sort
Okay.
of all around and related, you're very much engaged in the same creative work. And so when we talk about writer's block, it's such a limiting term, as if something's literally keeping someone from typing in a way. And there's kind of so much more around it. And also, creative people need respite. They need to sometimes
Mm,
pause and recharge the batteries and not be writing. You have to learn to
yeah.
recognize that when that state is necessary. It's not that you're blocked, it's that you're exhausted. And so, we need
Mm,
to give ourselves breaks, um, and do other things. If you're lucky enough to travel, change your headspace however you can. Read a book in a genre you'd never touch otherwise, do something to shake up your brain patterns a bit. And, these are ways of dealing with what we call writer's block, which I think is an overly convenient term in some ways.
yeah, I love the answer. It's a different nuance and I hadn't thought about before. So I love that because I think thinking is important. And I think when we are trying to create and we've got no energy, we're not inspired, I would imagine the process can become more frustrating because maybe that's when we know that we should be thinking, we should maybe reading something, and we should be finding something to inspire us that will enable us to actually, when we do come to write, we're more engaged, the energy's there, the flow's there.
Exactly.
Another question's come to mind as you were talking. So how do you find ideas? When do you know that you've gone from maybe finding an idea to that's actually a novel?
Hmm. Uh, it has to live inside me for quite a while before I know I need to act on it. I've had the experience of coming up with ideas and I start outlining and making notes and I start writing, and it dies because I didn't let it germinate
Mm,
enough. And this is my process. Other people would have a
mm,
different answer, but I didn't let it germinate long enough, and I rushed at it.
okay.
And but when an idea lives in me, like for example, some ideas I'm not going to share now, but I've had some ideas swirling in my head literally for years and years and years, that because they won't leave, I probably will end up writing about them. Because they won't leave. They just won't. It's
Mm.
like, yep, I want to write about that. Yep, I wanted to write about that 10 years ago. I still want to write about that. It's just that some things wait for the right time, And so I think that's one way,
And when you have an idea and it's like a consistent thing, are you writing down notes just to maybe capture a little bit of it? Do you, I don't know, do you use voice notes? Is there any of that kind of stuff going on?
I make lots of notes, on to written notes. I don't use voice notes. I
Yeah.
use a lot, but I make lots of written notes. Sometimes it'll be very brief. Sometimes it'll begin to be extensive, depending on where I am in planning a story. But yes, I'm big on the notes and
Okay.
research as well. I bring research into all my books. Yeah.
Okay, lovely, lovely. So I want to talk about your book. I love the title, by the way. So if
Thank
you
you.
and I love the artwork. So when people will get to see this, and I'm sure that they will love it as well. So maybe you can tell me about how the title came about and what we can expect when we devour your book.
So, Wrangling the Doubt Monster, Fighting Fears, Finding Inspiration. This book, which is quite short, which is lovely because you can read the whole thing in one sitting, which I think is lovely to have some short things in the world. Um,
Yeah.
this book really came out of my couple-year journey, becoming a book coach, and meeting a lot of writers and really exploring our identity as coaches and writers and all the doubts that came up. Can I do this work? I'm not qualified to do this work, or all the what if questions.
Yeah.
What if I say the wrong thing to a client? What if I can't get a client? What if I do a bad job, making comments on manuscript? What if this? What if that? I just, I can't, I won't. And so I don't think I can. So, in fact, I have a little thing in the book is like, I didn't think I could. I didn't think I should. I wasn't good enough to try. I didn't know enough to do. I was lesser than. I mean, these are all the tapes that
Mm.
run through our head. And so I wrote this little book, um, because I wanted to get this out in the open. I want us to talk about this openly. And in fact, I've just launched a newsletter on Substack that's around these themes. Doubt Monster, the newsletter is Doubt Monster. And um I want to be clear that there are many, 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 many how-to and self-help psychology books out in the world. I'm a writer. I'm not a health professional. I'm not a psychologist. I make no claims to pretend to be any of those things. So my book is really meant to inspire and kind of be like a companion for
Yeah.
the creative person. It's not meant to, it's not really meant, there's a little bit of prescriptive stuff in there that you can consider, but very little. It's mostly meant to show you that you're not alone in this.
Mm.
And so I'm not out there to like slam lessons at you, like do this, don't do that. Here's how to approach this. It's more like, hey, let's breathe. Let's breathe in this together. These things are true about doubt and that we have them. Let's breathe around this together. It's much more like that. And I feel like there was a place, I feel there's a place for that. And that's what this little book is.
Yeah, 100%. I totally agree with you. I think there's a place for people that are psychologists or got that expertise, but I think for creatives that really have all those doubts and resilience is a challenge. I think the idea of having some companion that we can relate to, we can use, we can have there in those difficult moments, and we can maybe acknowledge that a lot of the thoughts, the doubts we have are kind of common, but we can maybe implement some tools that can help us move beyond those challenges which are normal, to get out our work which the world needs to read, see, and be inspired by.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. And I'm excited. So when it comes out, I'm excited because I would imagine that the book isn't just for authors, people like me, podcasters that have doubts.
Yes.
And
Yes.
creative sphere, that we
Exactly.
all have doubts and hang-ups about, should I do this? Should I do that? How will it be perceived?
Yes, it is for anyone who's taking any creative risks. And that's in business too. People take their creative
Totally.
risks in business too.
Totally.
So yes, it really is. And again, as I say, it really is meant to be, it's kind of like that little book that you keep on your bedside table or next to your computer. And I mean, for people to dip in and out of it. And it's that kind of a little book. So it's not, I'm not landing some big heavy tome. You know how people are always saying to us, oh, you must read this and you must read that. And everybody wants you to read a million books. And the good thing about this one is that it's sort of light and short. I don't mean superficial so much as, something you really can dip in and out of, and come back to.
Okay. I'm excited to read and share, because I know people that need to read this book, and I know it will help them hugely. So I wanted to ask you, so how can people get in contact with you, whether they
Right.
find more about your newsletter, want to find out more about coaching and your books, and so there's so much there.
The best place to start is my author website. And if you join, I will tell you what that is. And maybe you can put it in show notes if you do
Absolutely.
that. When you go to my author website, which is amywrites.live, AMYWRITES.live, not .net, not .org, not .com, .live, LIVE. When you go to amywrites.live, you can very easily, in about 30 seconds, join my email list. And the minute you're on that list, you're going to find everything else you're going to learn immediately about. You will learn about pre-orders, about any special giveaways, about any sneak previews. All that stuff will be forthcoming. Publishing is a very, very, very long, slow process. And so my publisher made the decision to bring this out next year, but I really want people to be aware and ready to receive it as soon as possible. And so that is the way to do this, is to get onto my mailing list, and then of course they can share that with anyone they like as well to sign up.
Lovely. Well, I will put all the links on the show notes, so it'll be very easy for people to keep up to date with the book, get the book, hopefully get in contact with you, tell them how it's helped them and so forth. And if they're looking to be helped with by coaching, obviously that I'm sure they can speak to you about that as well. So I have one last question, I think, and that is the recurring question. So if you could invite 3 inspirational people to dinner, alive or past, who would be the 3 people that you'd want to invite?
Okay, two of them are very much dead, and one of them is thankfully very, very much alive. So One is Henry James, who is a late 19th, early 20th century American writer. Yes, another dead white male. He wrote in an extraordinarily complex manner, but what he did is he pioneered a whole new form of fiction, really, which was giving characters a tremendous interior life. And he can be difficult to read, but if you're the kind of reader who's looking for a challenge, very rewarding. And I'm desperate to ask him about his own process, which I think seems immensely complex. And so he's one I want to talk to. Plus, I want to get a sense of his personality because I think he was very, very interesting and possibly a very reticent person. And I just want to know more about him. Jane Austen, for all the reasons that everybody wants to meet Jane Austen. And I don't care if it seems like a cliche. Now we're into, dead white woman. She's an extraordinary writer. And to have been a woman author when she was in the 18th century, when women writers were held in great suspicion, is extraordinary. And her work is extraordinary, and her work holds up today, which is also just so remarkable. I mean, back in the day, you didn't have editors poring over your manuscripts, I think, quite to the extent that they do now. And so
Really?
she was just an incredibly gifted writer. So it would be wonderful to see what was Jane really like, right? A lot of people are obsessed with that. In fact, it's a big obsession for many people. The third, though, is Zadie Smith. I interestingly, who's very much a living UK based writer. I have read more of her essays than I even have of her fiction, and I know she's got a big new book out as well. And her essays are just extraordinarily clear, insightful pieces about culture and literature, and I find myself reading them and nodding and going, I wish I'd written this. Had I written this, this is exactly the way I would have wanted to write it. She's just brilliant. And she would just be an awesome person to have a glass of wine with and just talk to. Because she's amazing. So those are my three.
We need to get this episode to her. So she joins, so she gets in contact with you and says, I love what you're doing, which she would love what you're doing, I'm sure.
Thank you, Zadie.
Sadie, so this is coming your way. Amy, what a delight. I really enjoyed this discussion. I knew I would enjoy this discussion. I knew I would learn a lot, be inspired, love what you're doing, and hopefully we can have many more conversations in the future.
Well, Paul, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. You've asked fantastic questions, and I've really enjoyed the conversation. I hope your listeners do, and I hope people will want to connect with me. Thank you.
Absolutely. So thank you so much. And thank you everybody for tuning into this episode of My Perfect Failure. Always looking to grow the show. So please do share this episode far and wide, particularly if you know anybody that's a creative, it's an author, you can be in business, and you want to maybe get rid of self-doubt and become more resilient. Please do share this episode. And your feedback is most welcome. So always keen to hear about the things you like and equally the things that you don't like. So you can find me at paul@myperfectfailure.com, or you can find me via the contact page via the website. So take care for now. Bye.
Thanks for listening to My Perfect Failure podcast. Be sure to visit www.myperfectfailure.com to join the conversation. Subscribe to our podcast on iTunes or Google Play. Look out for our next episode.